So I've been suffering clinical depression since I was 14 and symptoms of anxiety for quite a few years before that. It reached quite a severe state in 2015, and that was maybe when my first experiences with services began. I tried a few different therapies, I went to a few different counsellors, but either they were too expensive or they didn't really gel with me.
My mental illnesses really started kicking in around grade 11, and that was about the same time that I was kicked out of home. So I ended up homeless, and I was 16. Started dating the first guy that came along. He ended up being abusive as well. So it was like I was dealing with that with everything else. I managed to get away from him 4 years later, and then I ended up in the women's shelter because of what he did, and then because I'm transgender. And then I ended up in my own place, and from there I just became a hermit. Like, I didn't leave the house. I was too scared to. And yeah, I had no education and no support.
Child safety is where we started, because we took on foster children, and since then we've experienced the physical health system, like the ordinary hospitals with cerebral palsy, the mental health system, and recently the juvenile justice system.
With this one doctor, and she was a wonderful listener and definitely cared about my well-being, and that she cared enough to send me directly to the hospital when I was unwell.
Once we got into the hospital system, because our boy was starting to have psychotic episodes, and I mean, we'd had no experience with that sort of thing at all. We'd accessed our local hospital a couple of times and got some good help.
One thing that does work in ward when it comes to the nursing staff is that most of them are willing to learn from the patients.
The major drawbacks of things like crisis admission units is that there's a very strong underlying tendency to treat patients as cases and not as individuals, or to treat a diagnosis instead of a person. So when I was admitted with a diagnosis of anorexia and mixed depression anxiety symptoms, the protocol is we put you on this meal plan, we do this, and then you get discharged when you reach a certain weight. But when I reached that weight, I still had depression and anxiety, and that wasn't in any way addressed.
I had a hospital once try and traumatize me into not self-harming again by putting in 84 staples without pain relief, while nurses hold me down. The whole traumatizing me into not self-harming again did not work. I had my first real suicide attempt a few days later, where I ended up in a coma.
Because we needed to go through child safety for everything, that help wasn't always forthcoming, or if it was forthcoming, it was after a fairly substantial battle to get it, including things like counselling. One of our boys came to us at 3.5, but was very, very badly abused and neglected and sexually assaulted, and then was acting those sorts of behaviours out in the school and at home. And it was very difficult to get him help. I think probably a better role for parents, be accepting that parents are there with the best interests of their children.
I think that these kind of services, they need to respect both the wants of the patient and, of course, the wants of the carers.
Listen. I know the word listen is said all the time when it comes to mental health, but no one actually really does.
I think the headspace model that they used was an exceptional one. If that could be extended, that would be ideal. That worked really, really well.
So an emphasis on definitely being open with each other, an emphasis on psychoeducation for carers, because that's a massive issue across every service that, quite frankly, the carers aren't really sure how to respond to the situation.
Having a little bit of training would help them a lot more, even in the normal ED, because mental health issues are becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and they don't know how to deal with it. I think everyone in any Queensland Health organisation should have some level of mental health training. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel? Depends on when you ask me. Broken, lost, feeling unreal. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are your self-harm urges? Look at my arms, the fresh burns and cuts. Of course they are there. These feelings must purge. On a scale of 1 to 10, how safe is this place? Considering I still have access to damaging things, my sporadic thoughts give chase. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to kill your person? All I want is for the thoughts to cease, the pain to end, and finally massacre that burden. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to ask for help when you need? There are a lot of factors here, from safety to even the tone of your voice, not just my trusting you, but you trusting me. After this interrogation session, yes, I have to be susceptible to help. I am any I can get to help me help myself. So I ask two things of you, since you people love scales so much. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to lend a helping hand when we struggle at times to even stand? And above all, on a scale of 1 to 10, how far will you go to help someone again? But no, all you do is prescribe pills.